The worst part wasn't that my family sold me into marriage. It was that everyone in town laughed when they saw the groom. Leo Vasquez remembered the sound more clearly than the church bells, more clearly than the priest's hollow voice, more clearly than his mother's manicured nails digging into his shoulder blade, pushing, always pushing, as if she could shove him across the aisle faster and be done with the embarrassment of having an Omega son who hadn't managed to land anyone respectable. Laughter had a shape when it was aimed at you, sharp at the edges, small enough to hide behind fans and polite coughs, but heavy enough to sink into your ribs and stay there, a splinter you'd carry for years. The chapel in Cedar Creek was barely half full, yet it felt crowded with judgment. Old wooden pews creaked under neighbors who hadn't come to celebrate. They'd come to witness the final humiliation of the Vasquez family's unwanted Omega son, the 22-year-old who'd somehow failed at the one thing Omegas were supposed to be good at, landing an alpha worth having. Leo stood in a white suit that had been altered from his older cousin's wedding clothes. The sleeves were still a little too long, the collar pressed against his throat like a warning. His father sat in the front row, staring straight ahead at nothing. His stepmother dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing heartbreak for anyone watching closely enough. His two older brothers leaned together near the side aisle, whispering jokes they didn't bother to hide. To them, this wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction finally completed. Across from Leo stood Silas Kane, the man everyone called the town fool. 28 years old, tall 6'4" at least, with shoulders that looked like they'd been built for carrying something heavier than groceries. He stood strangely still, dressed in a dark suit that looked too simple to be expensive and too perfectly fitted to be cheap. Black hair fell slightly over his pale forehead. His gray eyes stayed lowered, fixed somewhere on the floor between them, as if he didn't understand why so many people were staring. For years, Cedar Creek had made stories out of him. Silas, who lived alone in the old cane house at the edge of town. Silas, who walked to the grocery store in silence, never speaking unless spoken to. Silas, who let children point at him without complaint. Silas, who never defended himself when grown men called him slow, broken, useless, a waste of alpha blood. Leo had heard all of it. And now he was expected to bind his life to this man, this stranger, because the Vasquezes owed more money than they could admit, and because an Omega son with no inheritance, no connections, and no wealthy fiancé was easier to sacrifice than a family name. Smile, his stepmother hissed through her teeth when Leo's lips trembled. People are watching. Leo wanted to tell her that people had always been watching. They watched when his father ignored him at dinner. They watched when his brothers corrected his posture, his tone, his clothes, his very breathing. They watched when the Vasquezes announced that Leo had agreed to marry Silas Kane out of compassion, as if Leo had chosen this out of kindness, instead of being cornered in the kitchen 2 nights ago while his father laid unpaid bills across the table like evidence in a trial. The ceremony passed in a blur of legal words and public silence. When Silas slid the ring onto Leo's finger, his hand was steady and warm. That surprised Leo. Everything about this day felt cold, the church, the guests, his family's eyes, except that touch. Warm. Grounding. Like stepping into sunlight after years in a basement. For one impossible second, Silas's gaze lifted. The blankness was gone. His eyes were focused, clear, almost frighteningly aware. Leo felt seen, so suddenly that his breath caught in his throat. Something electric passed between them. A current. A question. Silas's pupils dilated, and Leo's Omega instincts, the ones he'd spent years learning to ignore, screamed at him. Alpha. Safe. Alpha. Mine. Then Silas looked down again. The mask returned so smoothly that Leo wondered if grief had made him imagine it. Afterward, no one threw rice. No one cheered. Leo's family didn't hug him. His father simply signed the final document, folded the copy into his coat pocket, and said, "You belong to your husband now." The words should have broken something in Leo, but they landed on a place already bruised past feeling. Silas's old pickup waited outside. Its paint had faded from years of sun and winter salt. The crowd lingered on the chapel steps, eager for one last look at the pathetic match, the unwanted Omega, and the town fool. Leo climbed into the passenger seat with his small suitcase pressed against his knees. Silas started the engine without a word. They drove past the diner, the feed store, the high school football field glowing beneath Friday night lights. Then beyond the last row of neat suburban homes, toward the dark line of pine trees at the edge of town. The cane house appeared at the end of a gravel road. Enormous, weather-beaten, with boarded windows on the west wing and ivy crawling up its white siding like fingers reaching for something to hold. It looked abandoned. A mansion pretending to be a ruin. Leo swallowed hard. This was his cage now. Silas parked, stepped out, and carried Leo's suitcase before Leo could protest. At the front door, he paused. His hand rested on the tarnished brass knob. For the first time all day, he spoke. His voice was low, calm, and nothing like a fool's. "I'm sorry they made you afraid of me." Leo froze. Silas didn't turn around. "But this house has only one rule," he continued. "No one here gets to sell you twice." Then he opened the door, and the darkness inside didn't feel empty. It felt like it had been waiting. Leo stood in the doorway for several seconds before stepping inside, because the house didn't match the man the town had invented. From the outside, the Kane place looked like a rotting memory, all sagging porch boards and shuttered windows. The kind of place parents pointed to when they wanted to scare children into coming home before dark. But inside, beneath the smell of old wood and rain-soaked stone, there was order. Not warmth, exactly, but precision. The entryway floor had been swept clean. The banister, though worn, was polished until it caught the faint gold from the hallway lamps. A row of black umbrellas stood in a brass holder by the door, all identical, all perfectly dry. Leo held his suitcase handle tighter, suddenly aware of how small his life looked beside the quiet discipline of this place. Silas closed the door behind them. The sound rolled through the house like a final period at the end of Leo's old life. "Your room is upstairs," Silas said, still using that calm, measured voice that didn't belong to any fool Leo had ever known. "Second door on the right. Bathroom across the hall. There are clean towels in the cabinet." Leo waited for the catch. The condition. The because. It didn't come. "You don't have to share a room with me," Silas added. Leo turned so quickly, his shoulder brushed the wall. "I thought married people were expected to." Silas looked at him then. Really looked. And Leo felt the same sharp awareness from the chapel cut through the dim hallway again. That electric current. That pull. His Omega instincts purred under his skin, and he hated how much he wanted to lean into it. "People expected you to smile today, too," Silas said. "I don't care what people expected." The words should have comforted him. But Leo didn't know how to receive kindness that came without a hook hidden inside it. In the Vasquez house, every gentle sentence had a debt attached. Every gift became evidence. Every favor became a chain. He followed Silas up the stairs, counting 12 steps because counting helped when panic tried to climb his throat. At the top, Silas set the suitcase beside a white-painted door and stepped back, leaving space between them, as if he understood that Leo needed air more than reassurance. "The room is yours for as long as you need it," Silas said quietly. "The lock works from the inside." Leo's chest tightened. He opened the door. The room was simple. Larger than any bedroom Leo had ever had. A queen-sized bed with cream-colored linens, a cedar dresser, curtains that matched the bed, and a window facing the dark pines. On the nightstand sat a glass of water, a new toothbrush still in its package, and a small folded card with Leo written in careful black ink. "Did you prepare this before the wedding?" he asked. "Yes." "Why?" Silas's gray eyes moved once to the card, then back to Leo's face. "Because no one should arrive at a new home and feel like an afterthought." Leo wanted to laugh, but the sound would have broken into something humiliating, so he looked down instead. He noticed Silas's shoes then, black leather, old at the soles but polished with military care. His suit cuff had ridden up slightly, revealing a watch with no logo but with the sleek, heavy look of something that cost more than Leo's father's truck. Another detail that didn't fit. Another crack in the town's favorite lie. Silas seemed to notice where Leo was looking, because he slowly adjusted his sleeve. "You should sleep," he said. "It's been a long day." Leo nodded. But when Silas turned to leave, the question slipped out before he could stop it. "Why do you let them call you that?" Silas paused with his hand near the railing. For a moment, the old house seemed to hold its breath around him. "Because people are careless when they believe they're smarter than you," he said. "They speak too loudly. They sign things without reading. They forget who is listening." Leo's fingers went cold around the suitcase handle. "Listening to what?" Silas's expression softened, but not enough to make him less frightening. "Not you," he said. "You were never the one I was watching." Then he walked down the stairs, leaving Leo alone with the sound of his own heartbeat and the terrible, thrilling realization that his marriage might not have been a punishment. It might have been a doorway into something he didn't understand yet. Leo didn't sleep so much as he disappeared for a few hours. The room was too quiet, the mattress too soft, the ceiling too unfamiliar. Every time the old house shifted in a wind, his eyes opened to the pale square of moonlight on the floor and the folded cards still waiting on the nightstand. He didn't read it until dawn. When the first gray light slipped between the cream curtains and the pines outside stood like silent guards, Leo finally unfolded the card. Inside were only 2 lines. "This room is yours for as long as you need it. The lock works from the inside." Leo sat very still, the card trembling between his fingers. It was such a small mercy that it hurt. In his father's house, privacy had been treated like arrogance. Closed doors were opened without knocking. Drawers were searched. Phone calls were questioned. Even his silence had been accused of hiding something. But here, in the house everyone mocked, owned by a man they called broken, someone had given him a lock and called it his. Leo dressed in the same white shirt from the wedding, because most of his clothes had been left behind, and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of coffee, dust, and cedar polish. No Silas. But a plate waited on the kitchen counter beneath a clean towel. Scrambled eggs, toast, sliced apples, and a mug of coffee with cream set beside it. There was no note this time. No instruction. No demand for gratitude. Leo ate slowly, almost suspiciously, listening for footsteps that never came. After breakfast, he wandered. The front rooms looked frozen in another decade, a formal sitting room with a covered piano, bookshelves lined with old legal volumes, framed landscapes dimmed by age. Yet every surface was clean. Every hallway had fresh light bulbs. Every window lock had been repaired. Someone maintained this ruin with invisible devotion. Leo passed a narrow door beneath the back staircase and paused. Unlike the others, this one had a new keypad mounted beside the frame, black glass shining against chipped paint. His pulse quickened. He told himself to walk away. He told himself that a room with a lock was not an invitation. But then he saw the edge of a photograph tucked halfway under the door, as if it had slipped from inside. He bent and pulled it free. It was a picture of his family's house, taken from across the street. Not recently, judging by the summer leaves on the maple tree, but not long ago either. On the back, someone had written Vasquez property transfer, pending verification. Leo's stomach tightened. Before he could put the photograph back, the keypad beeped once. The door clicked open. Leo stumbled backward as if the house itself had caught him stealing. The space beyond was not a storage closet. It was a stairwell leading down, lit by thin strips of white light along the floor. Cold air rose from below, carrying the scent of metal, paper, and expensive electronics. Leo should have turned around. Instead, he descended one careful step at a time, his hands sliding along the wall. At the bottom was a room that did not belong inside an old country mansion. 3 large monitors covered one wall, showing security feeds from the driveway, the porch, the backwoods, and the main road into town. A long table held stacked folders, maps, property records, bank statements, and photographs pinned with color-coded tabs. In the center of it all was his family's name, written again and again across documents Leo had never seen. Vasquez Holdings, Vasquez Debt Restructuring, Kane Land Acquisition, Private Settlement. Leo's breath went thin. There were pictures of his father leaving a bank in Denver, his stepmother at a charity luncheon in Boulder, his brothers shaking hands with men Leo didn't recognize. And beside those images were older photographs, faded at the edges, of Silas as a boy, maybe 10 or 11, standing between two smiling adults in front of the same house. The woman had Silas's gray eyes. The man had Silas's solemn mouth. Beneath the photograph, a single line had been typed in bold letters. They didn't lose everything by accident. Leo backed away from the table. His heel struck a metal cabinet. The sound rang through the room. A monitor woke from sleep, and a live video call window appeared, waiting for connection. On the screen was the name Kane Holdings. Executive Channel. Leo stared at it, frozen. The town fool didn't have a secret room because he was strange. He had one because he had enemies. And somehow, Leo had married directly into the center of the truth. The video call connected before Leo could find the courage to close it. A woman appeared on the center monitor, sharp-faced and elegant, with silver hair pulled into a low knot and glasses balanced at the end of her nose. She looked down at a tablet, already speaking before her eyes lifted. Mr. Kane, the Denver acquisition team confirmed the transfer documents were altered 3 days before the original foreclosure. Which means the Vasquez signatures aren't just connected to the Kane estate, they're the hinge point. Leo stopped breathing. The woman looked up. Her expression changed at once, not with panic, but with the controlled alarm of someone trained never to waste emotion. You are not Mr. Kane. Leo reached for the keyboard, but his fingers hovered uselessly above the keys. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Step away from the desk, please. Her voice remained polite, but it carried enough authority to make Leo obey. State your name. Leo Vasquez. The woman went still. For one long second, even the security feed seemed quieter. Do not touch anything else, Mr. Vasquez. Footsteps sounded on the stairs behind him. Leo turned so fast his shoulders struck the edge of the cabinet. Silas stood at the bottom of the stairwell, one hand resting lightly against the wall, his face unreadable in the white glow of the monitors. He wore no jacket now, only a dark dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, and there was nothing clumsy or slow in the way he moved. Every step was deliberate. Every inch of him felt controlled. The mask from town was gone, and without it, Silas Kane looked less like a man people mocked and more like a storm that had learned patience. Leave us, Margaret, he said. The woman on the screen hesitated. Silas, he's seen the files. I know. Then he may need counsel. He needs the truth first. Margaret's mouth tightened, but she nodded once. The call ended. Leo stood between the desk and the wall of evidence, trapped not by Silas, but by what he now understood. You're not him, Leo whispered. You're not the man they said you were. Silas's gaze moved across the room, taking in the open folders, the photograph in Leo's hand, the fear Leo was trying and failing to hide. No, he said. I'm not. Then why pretend? Silas walked to the table and picked up one of the folders marked with Leo's family name. He didn't shove it at Leo. He simply opened it and laid it down where Leo could see. Property maps. Loan agreements. A chain of signatures, Leo's father's name, his stepmother's initials. Numbers so large they made Leo dizzy. Because when powerful people think you're harmless, Silas said quietly, they stop guarding their doors. Leo stared at the documents until the words blurred. They laughed at me in grocery stores. They talked over me in banks. They used my name in rooms where they thought I couldn't understand them. Silas's voice was calm, but beneath it, Leo heard something old and cold. For 12 years, this town handed me everything I needed to destroy them, because they believed a fool couldn't build a case. Leo looked at the documents, at his father's signature, at the dates, at the numbers. My family. Your father helped move land that didn't belong to him. Your stepmother helped hide money through church donations and charity funds. Your brothers have been pressuring local businesses to sign leases tied to the same shell company. Leo shook his head. I didn't know. I know. The answer came too quickly, too firmly. Leo looked up. Silas's face hadn't softened, but his eyes had. You were 19 when the first papers were signed, Silas said. You weren't listed on any account. You weren't present at any meeting. They kept you outside the room because they thought you were useless to them until they needed a sacrifice. The word landed hard. Sacrifice. Leo remembered the kitchen table. The bills. His father's flat voice explaining duty as if love were a debt ledger. So why marry me? Silas closed the folder. Because 2 weeks ago, your father tried to offer you to another creditor in exchange for time. Leo's knees nearly failed. Silas stepped forward, then stopped himself. Leaving space, I intercepted the arrangement. I made a better offer. Legal. Public enough that they couldn't undo it quietly. Binding enough that no one else could claim you as payment for anything. Leo stared at him, torn between anger and a terrifying kind of relief. You bought me from them. Silas flinched. Barely, but Leo saw it. I removed you from the sale, he said. There's a difference. He opened a drawer, took out a small brass key, and placed it on the table between them. There's a car in the garage with a full tank. There's cash in the glove compartment. And a phone with Margaret's number programmed into it. If you want to leave, you can leave today. Leo looked at the key, then at the man who had let an entire town call him broken, so he could become invisible enough to hunt the truth. And if I stay? Leo asked. Silas's answer was quiet. Then you'll know enough to be in danger. But no one will ever stand between you and the truth again. For a long moment, Leo didn't touch the key. It sat on a metal table beneath the cold white lights, small enough to fit in his palm, heavy enough to change the rest of his life. He'd spent years dreaming of escape. But in those dreams, the door had always opened towards something clear and bright. A bus ticket, a city skyline, a job where no one knew his last name. Freedom had never looked like an old garage, borrowed car, and a stranger with gray eyes giving him permission to walk away from a marriage neither of them had chosen. You'd really let me go, Leo said. It wasn't a question, it was disbelief trying to become one. Silas leaned back against the edge of the desk, keeping both hands visible, as if even his stillness had been chosen to make Leo feel safer. Yes, even after, especially after all this. Leo looked around the room again. His family's name covered the walls like a stain. The Vasquezes had always presented themselves as respectable, old-fashioned, quietly generous people. They donated pies to church fundraisers. They sponsored the 4th of July parade. Leo's father shook hands with the mayor every December beneath the town Christmas lights. Leo had grown up believing their coldness was private, a thing that lived only behind closed doors. Seeing it spread across legal files and bank records made him feel as though the floor had tilted. Silas picked up one photograph and turned it toward him. It showed Leo's father standing outside the county records office with a man in a charcoal coat. This is Daniel Mercer, Silas said. He runs Mercer Development out of Denver. On paper, he buys distressed properties and restores them. In reality, he uses families like yours to pressure people into signing away land before they understand what they're losing. Leo recognized the name from whispered phone calls, from the way his father always closed his office door when that man called. What does he want here? The mineral rights under the North Ridge. The cane land sits on a private water source and shale deposits. My parents refused to sell. Silas's voice didn't rise, but Leo heard the grief beneath the control, buried so deep it had become part of his bones. A year later, our accounts were frozen. Our loans were called in, and half the town decided we were finished. Leo thought the faded photograph of young Silas between his parents. He imagined the boy in that picture growing into a man who lowered his eyes on purpose while the town laughed. "So you left," Leo said softly. "I disappeared." Silas's mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. "I went to Chicago with $200, a scholarship I almost lost, and my mother's old laptop. I built Kane Holdings under a different corporate name." By the time anyone here heard rumors of a Kane billionaire, they'd already trained themselves not to look at the quiet man buying groceries on Main Street. The room felt smaller with every revelation. Leo had married a ghost who'd spent 12 years becoming powerful enough to return as his own reckoning. "And me?" Leo asked. "Where did I fit into your plan before the wedding?" Silas's gaze dropped for the first time. "You didn't." The honesty struck harder than any polished excuse could have. "I knew your family was involved. I knew you were isolated. I knew they used your Omega status when it benefited them and ignored your humanity when it didn't. But I didn't intend to involve you until Margaret found the creditor agreement." Leo wrapped his arms around himself. "The one where they were going to trade me." "Yes. So you made yourself the lesser evil." Silas accepted the words without defense. "That was the most I had the right to be." Silence settled between them. Not empty, but crowded with all the things Leo had no language for yet. Anger, relief, shame. A fragile thread of trust he didn't want to feel and couldn't fully deny. At last, he reached for the key. Silas's eyes followed the motion, but he didn't move. Leo closed his fingers around the brass until its edge pressed into his skin. "I'm not staying because I forgive you," Leo said. "I'm not asking you to. And I'm not staying because I trust you." "Good." Silas's voice was quiet. "Trust shouldn't be given to anyone who arranged your life without asking." Leo looked at him, then really looked, and saw the terrible patience in his face. "I'm staying because I want to know what my family did. I want to see every paper, every signature, every lie." Silas nodded once. "Then we start with the truth." Above them, somewhere in the old house, a grandfather clock struck 9. Outside, Cedar Creek was waking up, pouring coffee, opening storefronts, repeating rumors. But beneath the ruined mansion at the edge of town, Leo Vasquez chose not to run. Not yet. For the first time, he chose to stay for himself. By noon, the old Kane house had stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like a place built with hidden doors. Leo followed Silas through files, dates, and signatures until the names on the papers no longer looked like ink, but like fingerprints. There were quiet patterns everywhere. A donation from the Vasquez Family Trust to a church renovation fund, followed 3 days later by a transfer into a Mercer Development account. A property lien filed against a farmer who'd refused to sell his acreage north of town, followed by a sudden medical bill settlement paid by one of Leo's brothers. The town council vote that changed zoning rules along the ridge, signed by men who'd all attended his father's backyard barbecue the summer before. Leo read until his eyes burned. Silas didn't rush him. He sat across the table with a legal pad, explaining only when Leo asked, never filling the silence with pressure. That was the strangest thing about him. Silas Kane could command a billion-dollar company from a basement beneath a ruined mansion, yet he never commanded Leo. When Leo needed water, Silas placed a glass nearby without making a performance of caring. When Leo's hands began to shake, Silas turned the most painful folder face down and said, 5 minutes. Not stop. Not enough. Just 5 minutes, as if Leo's limits mattered. It made Leo angry in a way he couldn't explain, because gentleness from Silas made his family's cruelty harder to excuse. By late afternoon, snow began to fall outside. Soft and early for Colorado, dusting the pine branches and turning the security feeds pale. Leo went upstairs for air and found Silas in the kitchen. Sleeves rolled up, quietly repairing the loose hinge on a cabinet door. The sight unsettled him more than the monitors had. A ruthless alpha billionaire, hidden under the town's laughter, standing in an old kitchen with screwdriver and a mug of black coffee, fixing something no one else would notice. "Do you always do that?" Leo asked from the doorway. Silas glanced over his shoulder. "Repair cabinets? Repair things that look fine from far away." Silas stilled for half a second. Then he tightened the last screw and closed the cabinet gently. "I suppose I do." Leo walked to the counter, keeping a careful distance, though he no longer felt the need to stand near the exit. "My father used to say broken things should be replaced before guests see them." Silas wiped his hands on a towel. Your father confused appearance with worth. The answer was so simple that Leo had no defense against it. He looked toward the window, watching snow gather on the porch railing. "You make it sound easy. It's not." Silas set the screwdriver aside. "I just had more years to learn." A knock struck the front door before Leo could answer. Not the hesitant knock of a neighbor, but 3 confident taps from someone who expected to be received. Silas's expression changed at once. Not dramatically, but completely. The man in the kitchen vanished behind still eyes and a quiet mouth. He became the version of himself Cedar Creek understood. Harmless, slow, unthreatening. Leo's stomach tightened. "Who is it?" Silas looked at the small monitor mounted beside the pantry. On the porch stood Leo's father, his stepmother, and both of his brothers, dressed like they were attending Sunday service rather than visiting the man they'd mocked yesterday. Leo's stepmother carried a covered casserole dish. His father held a bottle of red wine. The performance had arrived with props. "You don't have to see them," Silas said. Leo watched his family through the tiny screen. His father's smile was calm and paternal. His stepmother's eyes were already wet. His brothers shifted impatiently, their polished shoes leaving dark prints in the snow. Yesterday, they'd given him away without a goodbye. Today, they'd come to the edge of town wearing concern like a costume. "Why are they here?" Leo asked, though he already knew. Silas's voice was quiet behind him. "Because word travels fast. And Mercer's people likely learned that Kane Holdings filed an injunction this morning." Leo looked at him. "They know who you are. Not all of it. Enough to be afraid. Enough to be greedy." The knocking came again. Louder this time. Leo felt the old instinct rise in him. The obedient pull to open the door, lower his head, accept the script. Then he remembered the key in his pocket. The lock on his bedroom door. The documents under the house. No one here gets to sell you twice. He straightened, surprising himself with the steadiness of his own voice. "Open it." Silas searched his face once, as if making sure the choice was truly his. Then he walked to the front door and pulled it open. Cold air swept into the hall. Leo's stepmother smiled first. "Bright and false." "Sweetheart," she said, as if the word had ever belonged to him. "We were so worried about you." Leo stepped beside Silas. Not behind him. His father's eyes flicked between them, measuring the distance, the house, the unseen money beneath the old walls. "Son," he said warmly. "We thought it was time both families had a proper conversation." Silas lowered his gaze, playing the fool so perfectly that Leo almost understood why the town had believed it. But Leo had seen the basement. He'd seen the storm beneath the silence. And for the first time in his life, when his family smiled at him, Leo didn't move closer. He moved 1 inch nearer to Silas. Leo's stepmother swept in first, carrying the casserole dish like an offering. Her perfume filled the air with powdered roses and practiced concern. His father followed with the wine, smiling at Silas with the careful patience adults use for children and people they didn't respect. His brothers came last, broad-shouldered and restless, their eyes moving over the entryway, the polished banister, the antique mirror, searching for proof of money beneath the dust. "We brought dinner," Leo's stepmother said, placing the dish on the hall table without being invited. A new marriage is such an adjustment. And poor Leo has always been sensitive. Leo felt the word poor land exactly where she aimed it. Not poor because he'd suffered. Poor because he was inconvenient. Silas gave a slow nod, his eyes lowered, his expression mild and empty in a way Leo now recognized as performance. "That's kind," Silas said, letting the sentence sound slightly uneven. Leo's father relaxed at once. The mask worked. It worked so well that Leo felt a cold anger rise in him, not at Silas, but at how easily his family believed weakness when they wanted to. "We should sit," his father said, already moving toward the parlor as if the house belonged to him. Silas stepped aside, but Leo noticed the brief glance he gave the hallway camera, the smallest tilt of his chin. Somewhere below them, the house was listening. In the parlor, the Vasquezes arranged themselves like guests of honor. Leo's father took the largest chair. His stepmother sat close to Leo on the couch, gripping his hand before he could pull away. "Sweetheart, you must understand, we were only trying to protect you," she said softly, with tears shining at the edges of her eyes. The situation was complicated. Your father was under terrible pressure. Leo stared at her fingers wrapped around his. Yesterday, those same fingers had adjusted his collar before the ceremony and whispered that he should be grateful anyone had agreed to take him. "Protect me from what?" he asked. His father cleared his throat. "From uncertainty. From scandal. From making choices too large for someone of your nature." There it was, dressed in a suit and tie. The old cage. Silas stood near the fireplace, silent, his shoulders slightly rounded, his gaze on the floor. Leo's oldest brother, Marcus, smirked at him. "Silas understands family duty, don't you?" he said slow and loud, as if speaking to someone half awake. "A husband should listen to people with more experience." Silas's mouth curved faintly. "Experience is useful." Marcus chuckled, mistaking the calm answer for stupidity. "Exactly." Leo's father leaned forward. "That's why we came. Since this marriage connects our families, now there are legal matters we should clarify. Leo is young, emotional, and not trained for financial responsibility. It would be best if any assets tied to this household were managed through a family trust, at least temporarily." The room went very quiet. Inside Leo, not because he was surprised, but because he was not. The visit, the casserole, the tears, the word sweetheart, all of it had been a hallway leading to this sentence. Silas lifted his head a little. "Assets." Leo's father smiled gently. "Property, investments, mineral rights, whatever remains of the Kane estate. Nothing dramatic. Just protection." "For Leo." "For Leo?" Silas repeated. "For everyone," his father replied. "Especially him." Silas looked at Leo then, and the mask slipped. Just enough for Leo alone to see the question in his eyes. "Do you want the truth now?" Leo's hand was still trapped beneath his stepmother's. He slowly pulled it free. "Ask him about Mercer," Leo said. His father's smile held, but the skin around his eyes tightened. "I don't know what you mean." Silas crossed the room and picked up the television remote from the side table. With one press, the dark screen above the fireplace came alive. Not with a movie, not with the weather, but with a scanned document bearing Vasquez's signatures and the clean black logo of Mercer Development. Leo's stepmother went pale. Marcus sat forward. His younger brother Derek whispered something under his breath. Silas's voice changed when he spoke again. The softness vanished. The uneven rhythm disappeared. What remained was controlled, polished, and colder than the snow gathering outside. Daniel Mercer filed a revised acquisition proposal last night, using Leo's marriage as leverage. The proposal assumes access to Kane land through a spouse transfer clause drafted by your attorney 6 months before Leo ever met me. Leo's father stood too quickly. "This is inappropriate." "No." Silas's voice didn't rise. "What's inappropriate is selling your son twice and expecting both buyers to stay quiet. The words struck the room like glass breaking, though nothing shattered. Leo's stepmother covered her mouth, but this time her tears didn't come fast enough. Leo's father looked at him, and for the first time there was no warmth, no performance, no fatherly disappointment, only calculation. "You have no idea what you're involved in," he said. Leo rose from the couch, his legs unsteady, but his voice clear. "I think I finally do." Silas pressed another button. Audio filled the room. Leo's father's voice, recorded from a phone call. Calm and unmistakable. "Leo will sign whatever we place in front of him once the marriage is done. He always does." Leo felt the final thread snap. Not loudly, not violently, but with a clean, silent mercy of something ending. His family stared at him as if they were only now realizing the person they dismissed had been present the whole time. Silas stepped beside him, not in front of him, not shielding him from a truth he'd chosen to face. "The proper conversation is over," Silas said. "The legal one begins tomorrow." Outside, the snow kept falling over Cedar Creek, soft enough to look innocent, heavy enough to bury every footprint leading back to the lies. The next morning, Cedar Creek woke to the kind of silence that only follows a storm. Snow covered the streets in a clean white sheet, softening porch steps, pickup trucks, church signs, and the sharp edges of every rumor that had traveled faster than weather. But beneath that quiet surface, the town was restless. By 10 o'clock, everyone knew something had happened at the old Kane house. By noon, half the businesses on Main Street had received notices from lawyers in Denver. By 3, Daniel Mercer's name had vanished from the county development website. And by sunset, every important person in Cedar Creek had been invited to the Kane Foundation Winter Gala at the Grand Bell Hotel in Denver. Leo stood in Silas's upstairs bedroom that evening, staring at the black suit laid across the bed. It wasn't borrowed. It wasn't altered from someone else's life. It had been tailored for him overnight, delivered in a silver garment bag with his name printed on a cream card. Leo ran his fingers over the sleeve, almost afraid to touch something that belonged to him without being a hand-me-down, a compromise, or a reminder that he should be grateful. Silas stood near the window in a midnight blue suit. His hair was brushed back. His face was calm in a way that made the whole room feel steadier. "You don't have to come," he said. Leo met his reflection in the mirror. He looked pale, nervous, unfamiliar, but not weak. "Are they going to be there? Your family? Everyone?" Silas's eyes softened. "Yes." Leo buttoned his jacket with slow hands. "Then I'm coming." The Grand Bell Hotel rose over downtown Denver in glass and gold. A world away from the boarded windows and gravel rode the town associated with Silas Kane. Cameras flashed at the entrance. Men in tailored coats shook hands beside marble columns. Women in evening gowns moved beneath chandeliers that scattered light like falling stars. Leo stepped from the black car and froze as the cold air touched his face. For a heartbeat, he heard the church laughter again. Then Silas appeared beside him. Not touching, not pushing, simply present. "Breathe," he said quietly. Leo did. Inside the ballroom, Cedar Creek had dressed itself in borrowed importance. The mayor stood near the champagne table. The county judge spoke with 2 councilmen. Leo's father turned when they entered, his smile already prepared. But it died before reaching his eyes, because Silas didn't enter as the quiet man from the grocery store. He entered as the room's center of gravity. Conversations faded one by one. People straightened. Phones lifted. The same neighbors who'd laughed at his wedding now watched Silas Kane cross the marble floor with the controlled ease of a man who owned more than buildings. He owned the truth they'd ignored. Margaret met them at the foot of the main staircase, elegant in silver, carrying a folder thin enough to look harmless. "Everything is ready," she said. Silas nodded, then looked at Leo. Last chance to step back. Leo's fingers curled at his sides, but his voice didn't shake. "No, The lights dimmed before the music ended. Silas walked to the stage at the center of the ballroom, while Leo remained beside Margaret, every nerve awake. On the screen behind Silas appeared the logo of Kane Holdings, followed by archived photographs of the old Kane estate, legal documents, transfer records, and financial trails Leo now recognized. No shouting followed. No dramatic chaos. Just the terrible quiet of powerful people realizing that paper could speak louder than reputation. Silas's voice carried through the ballroom, low and clear. For 12 years, Cedar Creek called my family careless, bankrupt, broken. For 12 years, some of the people in this room profited from that lie. Leo saw his father's face harden. His stepmother gripped his brother's arm. The mayor looked at the floor. Silas continued, calm as winter. Tonight, Kane Holdings is filing civil actions against Mercer Development and every partner who participated in fraudulent land transfers, coerced settlements, and shell company laundering tied to the Northridge acquisition. The screen changed again. The Vasquez signatures appeared. A murmur moved through the room like wind across dry leaves. Leo felt exposed, even though his name was absent from every document. Then Silas turned slightly, searching the crowd until his eyes found Leo. "There's one person the conspirators try to use as a bridge into my estate," he said. "They underestimated him, because they'd spent years teaching him to underestimate himself." Leo's breath caught. Silas stepped down from the stage, crossing the space between them while the whole room watched. He stopped beside Leo, not in front of him, and offered his hand without demanding it. Leo looked at that hand, remembering the ring, the key, the basement, the truth. Then he took it. Silas faced the ballroom again. "This is Leo Vasquez Kane, my husband. Not a bargain. Not a clause. Not a payment. And from this night forward, anyone who speaks to him as property will answer to both of us." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the sound of every old story collapsing. Leo looked across the ballroom at his family, and for the first time, their disappointment no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like evidence that he had survived them. By the time Leo and Silas returned to the old Kane house, the snow had stopped, and the world looked strangely new. The gravel road glittered beneath the headlights. The pine branches bent under white weight, and the mansion at the edge of town no longer looked like a ruin to Leo. It looked tired. It looked guarded. It looked like something that had survived being misunderstood for so long that it had forgotten how to be seen. Silas parked by the porch and turned off the engine. Neither of them moved right away. The silence between them was different now. Not empty. Not awkward. Just full. Somewhere in Denver, lawyers were already moving. Margaret had stayed behind with the documents. Mercer Development had lost its mask in front of every person who'd once benefited from pretending not to know. Leo's father had tried to approach him after the gala, wearing that old expression of disappointment like a borrowed coat. But Leo hadn't stepped back. He'd simply said, "Don't call me your son when you need me. You gave up that right when you turned my life into paperwork." His stepmother had cried, real tears or polished ones. Leo no longer cared. His brothers had looked at him as if he'd become a stranger. And maybe he had. Maybe the person they'd known had only ever been the version of Leo who lowered his eyes to keep the peace. Silas hadn't spoken for him. He'd stood beside him, steady and silent, letting Leo's voice fill the space it had been denied for years. Now, in the quiet car, Silas reached into the inside pocket of his coat and took out an envelope. He placed it on the console between them. Leo looked down at it. His name was written across the front in Margaret's precise handwriting. "What is this?" "A petition for annulment," Silas said. The words struck softly, but they struck. Leo turned toward him. Silas's face was calm, though his hand rested a little too still against his knee. "The marriage protected you when it had to," he continued. "It gave me legal standing to block your family's agreement and stop Mercer from using you. But now the evidence is public. Margaret can separate your name from every filing. You can leave with no debt attached to you, no obligation to me, and enough money in an independent trust to start over anywhere in the country. Leo stared at the envelope until the white paper blurred. For weeks, maybe years, freedom had meant distance. It had meant a Greyhound ticket heading west, a studio apartment in Portland or Seattle, a job at a bookstore where no one knew what an Omega from Cedar Creek was supposed to be. But freedom, he was learning, was not only leaving. Sometimes freedom was being handed the door and realizing no one would punish you for choosing whether to walk through it. You already signed it, Leo said. Silas nodded. My part is done. Yours is entirely your choice. Leo picked up the envelope. It felt lighter than the brass key it felt in the basement, but somehow more powerful. He thought of the chapel laughter, the locked bedroom door, the first breakfast waiting under a clean towel, the truth laid bare on a metal table. Silas standing beside him in the ballroom, not claiming him as property, but naming him as a person. Leo opened the car door and stepped into the cold. Silas followed at a careful distance, giving him space. Even now. On the porch, Leo faced the house. Then the man who'd worn foolishness like armor, because the town was too arrogant to question its own cruelty. I hated you for making a choice that involved my life, Leo said. Silas accepted it with a small nod. You should have. But you also gave me the first real choice I ever had. Leo held up the envelope. So I'm going to make one. Silas's gray eyes searched his face, guarded in a way Leo understood now. Leo tore the envelope once, then again. The sound was small and clear in the winter air. The pieces fell into the snow like the last scraps of an old contract. Silas didn't smile at first. He only looked at the torn paper, then at Leo, as if hope was a language he hadn't let himself speak in years. Leo, he said quietly, you don't owe me a life because I helped return yours. Leo stepped closer. Not because he had to. Not because anyone pushed him. But because his feet chose the distance. I know, he said. That's why I can stay. That night, for the first time, Leo didn't sleep in the guest room. He stood in the doorway of Silas's bedroom, hesitant, his heart hammering so loud he was sure the whole house could hear it. The snow had stopped hours ago, and moonlight poured through the windows, turning everything silver and soft. Silas was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his dress shirt from the gala, the top buttons undone, his forearms bare, his dark hair falling across his forehead. He looked up when Leo appeared, and something in his expression shifted. Not surprise. Waiting. You don't have to, Silas started. I know, Leo interrupted. His voice came out steadier than he felt. I know I don't have to do anything. That's the point. He crossed the room slowly. Each step felt like a choice. Each breath felt like breaking something old and building something new. When he reached Silas, he didn't sit. He stood between the alpha's knees, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off his body, close enough to smell him, cedar and snow and something deeper, something that made Leo's Omega instincts purr with recognition. Safe. Alpha. Home. I've been told what to do my whole life, Leo said softly. When to smile. When to speak. When to be grateful. When to disappear. He reached out and touched Silas's face. The alpha went completely still beneath his fingers. I'm not disappearing anymore. Leo leaned down and kissed him. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that came from years of silence finally breaking, desperate and gentle all at once, the way ocean waves crash against cliffs they've been wearing down for centuries. Silas made a sound low in his throat, a sound Leo felt more than heard. His hands came up, not grabbing, not demanding, but settling on Leo's waist like he was something precious. Something real. Leo, Silas breathed against his mouth. If we do this, I need you to understand. I've wanted you since the chapel. Since before the chapel. Since the first time I saw you in town, buying groceries with your head down, looking like you'd never been given a reason to hope. Leo's heart cracked open. You've been watching me? Protecting you? Silas's gray eyes were almost black in the low light. From a distance. Before the marriage. Your brothers used to follow you sometimes, after fights, when they wanted to remind you of your place. I made sure they never got too far. Leo's breath caught. I didn't know. No one was supposed to. Silas pulled him closer, not rough, not careful either. Just inevitable. Like gravity finally allowed to work. Leo sank onto his lap, straddling his hips, and the position made everything feel urgent. Silas's hands slid up his back, under the soft sweater he'd changed into after the gala. Warm palms against bare skin. Leo shivered. We can stop any time, Silas murmured. Say the word and I'll. Don't. Leo kissed him again, harder this time. Don't you dare offer to stop. Not when I'm finally choosing something for myself. Silas groaned, low and raw, an alpha sound that went straight through Leo's bones. The kiss deepened. Silas's mouth moved from Leo's lips to his jaw, down the column of his throat, and Leo tilted his head back with a gasp. His fingers tangled in Silas's dark hair, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had spent 22 years trying to make Leo feel small. You're not small, Silas said against his skin, as if reading his mind. You were never small. They made you quiet, but quiet isn't weak. Leo's eyes burned. Silas pulled back just enough to look at him. His face was flushed, his pupils blown wide, his chest rising and falling like he'd run a marathon. Tell me what you want, he said. Leo's throat tightened. No one had ever asked him that. No one. I want. He had to stop. Swallow. Start again. I want to feel like I matter. Like I'm not just collateral. Like I'm yours, but because I chose it. Not because someone signed a paper. Silas's hands tightened on his waist. You matter, he said, each word deliberate. You've always mattered. I just couldn't tell you until now. Leo kissed him again, and this time there was no stopping. Clothes disappeared between kisses and whispered names. The bed was cold at first, then warm, then hot as their bodies found each other in the dark. Silas was careful in ways Leo hadn't expected, always checking, always asking, always making sure Leo knew he could stop. But Leo didn't want to stop. He wanted more. When Silas finally pushed inside him, slow, so painfully slow, Leo's whole body arched off the bed. His nails raked down Silas's back. His mouth opened on a sound that wasn't quite a moan and wasn't quite a sob. There, he gasped. Right there, don't stop. Silas didn't stop. He moved with a rhythm that felt like a promise, deep and steady and devastating. His forehead pressed against Leo's. His breath mixed with Leo's breath. His hands cradled Leo's face like he was something sacred. Mine, Silas whispered, not a claim, not a demand. Question. Leo's answer came without hesitation. Yours. And when they shattered together, Leo first, then Silas, the alphas not swelling and locking them together, Leo felt something he'd never felt before. Safe. Not because he was trapped. Because he was held. Later, much later, they lay tangled in the sheets, moonlight spilling across the floor, the house settling around them like it was finally at peace. Leo traced patterns on Silas's chest. The alpha's arm was wrapped around him, solid and warm, and Leo could feel his heartbeat, steady, real there. I should be angry at you, Leo said quietly, for arranging the marriage, for not telling me, for letting me think. He shook his head. I spent the whole wedding thinking my life was over, that I was being given to someone who couldn't protect me, who couldn't even protect himself. Silas was quiet for a long moment. I know, he said finally, and I'm sorry for that, truly. But if I told you the truth before the marriage, before the papers were signed, your family would have found out. They would have found another way to use you. Another buyer. Another debt. Leo's chest tightened. You couldn't have known that. I couldn't have risked it. Silas tilted his chin up, forcing Leo to meet his eyes. You were the only part of this I couldn't control. And that terrified me. Leo stared at him. The ruthless alpha billionaire. The man who'd spent 12 years planning revenge. The town fool who'd let everyone underestimate him. Terrified of Leo. Why? Leo whispered. Because Silas said, I fell in love with you before I ever spoke to you. And love, real love, is the most dangerous thing in the world. Because it means someone else's safety matters more than your plan. Someone else's happiness matters more than your revenge. Leo's heart stopped. Silas, I didn't marry you to win a case, Leo. I married you because I couldn't stand the thought of anyone else owning you. His voice dropped. And I know that sounds like the same thing. But it's not. It was never the same thing. Leo kissed him again. Soft this time. Tender. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Silas's arms tightened around him. Promise. Leo thought about the key in his pocket. The torn envelope in the snow. The lock on his bedroom door that he'd never used because he never needed to. Promise. Months later, Cedar Creek told a different story. The Vasquezes left town after the lawsuits began. Their polished names stripped down to signatures and consequences. Mercer Development collapsed under investigations that reached far beyond Colorado. The North Ridge became protected cane land, untouched by drills, lined with walking trails and a small community center funded by the New Cane Foundation. The old mansion changed too. Boards came off the windows. The west wing filled with light. Leo painted the front door deep blue because Silas said the house should finally look like someone was welcome there. People in town stopped calling Silas a fool. But Leo sometimes thought they'd never understood the word anyway. A fool wasn't a man who stayed silent. A fool was someone who mistook silence for weakness. And on quiet mornings, when snow melted from the pines and sunlight crossed the polished banister, Leo would find Silas in the kitchen, fixing some small broken thing. And he would understand. Love hadn't saved him by becoming another cage. It had saved him by leaving the door open and staying anyway. One evening, 6 months after the gala, 6 months after the truth, 6 months after Leo chose to stay, they stood on a porch together. The sun was setting over the pines, painting everything gold and pink and soft. You know, Leo said, leaning against Silas's shoulder, I used to dream about leaving this town, about getting on a bus and never looking back. Silas's arm was around his waist, warm, steady, home. And now, Leo looked out at the gravel road, the dark trees, the mansion that had stopped being a ruin the day he'd stopped being a prisoner. Now I dream about what we're going to build here. Silas pressed a kiss to his hair. What do you want to build? Leo smiled, a real smile, the kind he'd forgotten he had. Everything. Then,